What's up everyone, Michael here with an impressions review of Disgaea PC, a port of a fairly old tactical JRPG that is personally one of my favorite games of all time, for quite a few reasons actually, and I'll obviously cover those in this video, but I do want to mention that because I may be lighter on some of my criticisms because of that, and I may be a little bit heavier on some of my criticisms because of that, because I've put so much time into this game, and so much love has been put into it, and I love it so much that I just want it to be, you know, a perfect game and everything like that, but it's obviously not. It's fairly old, it's got tons of problems that are both just because it's an older game, and from the fact that it just has some underlying kind of design flaws to it as well, which, you know, obviously I'll talk about in this video. But since it is such an old game, the PC port is quite good, by the way, for anybody wondering, and I kind of want to talk about just the PC specific stuff, and then I'll go back into the game because the game itself hasn't changed much, but they did add a few things for the PC version. So I'm just going to start playing in the background so people who don't know Disgaea, they can see what it is kind of right off the bat, and then I'll obviously talk about it later. But for the PC version, the game has been ported multiple times, and this means that, you know, there's obviously a bunch of different changes that could end up being made. Now, luckily, the gameplay itself hasn't been changed at all. The game has been ported to the PS2 version, and through the PS2 version was the original before it was ported to anything else. And so through each of the versions, there's been the PS2, which had 2 exclusive songs on the US version and an exclusive voice actor for Etna, which never actually made it into any other port of the game. However, that's the only content that is missing from the PC version, because when it launched, it was essentially an upgraded version of the PSP version, which came with some new textures and stuff like that. You can see the new textures here, which you can actually turn off, by the way. So if you don't like any of the adjustments they made, you can go to settings and you can actually change them on this screen, I believe. So you can turn on to the old map textures and you can see that looks just like the PS2 and PSP versions of the game. Now, the DS version of the game also came with exclusive characters. So it came with Rosaline, Adele. It also came with Plenier, I think is how you say her name. I currently have her in my game as well, and I think a few others or whatever. They ended up adding those characters later on in a patch, and so the current version of Disgaea PC actually has all of that as well. Now, the PC version also comes with a few like gameplay enhancement type stuff, which is not gameplay stuff. All the balance and stuff like that is still broken as hell, so all the kind of broken abilities and everything like that that were in the game originally are still in the game. However, they did end up making it so that you can use the mouse and keyboard. So there's full mouse and keyboard support, so you can see my mouse moving around the screen. I probably should have waited to use an ability just so I could show you this, but it actually has full keyboard and mouse support, so you can play with just the keyboard, you can play with just the mouse, which is actually pretty cool. So I can go ahead and click on stuff, I can click around. The menus were obviously designed for, you know, a mouse and keyboard and stuff like that, or not a mouse and keyboard, but really a gamepad, and that's the way I'm used to playing the game. However, you know, there's also a bunch of different stuff. So for the gamepad, you actually have to hold down X and do your directions and stuff like that, but on the mouse, you just click and drag. So it takes a while to get used to, but, you know, once you actually get used to using it and stuff like that, and the camera also feels a little bit weird, but once you get used to using it, you can actually play the game completely with just the mouse or just the keyboard as well. The default bindings for the keyboard are a little bit strange, so I would suggest changing them, but you can actually rebind them, which is another thing the PC version of the game has. It has rebindable keys. You can also completely rebind the controller, and it even supports the triggers, which is actually pretty rare in these old types of games. A lot of older games don't support the triggers and stuff like that, so I'm using an Xbox One controller, and I can actually rebind things to the triggers, so that's kind of nice, which isn't in all these older types of ports. So it's actually a fairly decent port. It performs really, really well at this stage. When it released, it had a lot of issues. The textures can sometimes be a little bit inconsistent. Like if we go ahead and abandon this level right here, it won't actually let me pause. There's a few issues with the older, just the style that it's an older game. Like I can't just hit start while animations are going. I have to wait until it's in here to actually open up this menu and then go to quit or whatever. Some of the textures will have some inconsistencies. So if I go back into my save here and I go down to this carpet is probably one of the perfect examples. They ended up patching it, but you can actually see there's a little tiny line underneath my character to where the squares are, where you can see the texture squares, to where it just doesn't quite line up properly, but it's very unnoticeable and it looks perfectly fine. It's just kind of the meta. Now, there used to be a bunch of problems with the textures and stuff like that, but once again, they patched this game so much that it's actually fixed up most of those issues. It does have some crashing issues as well, but I think they're mostly fixed. I think outside of, since the last patch that they did, I think I've only crashed once in 100 hours of the game running. Now, that's not 100 hours of gameplay, that's just 100 hours of the game running, so I don't know how often it crashes, but I haven't been having crashes that have been affecting my game performance or anything like that. Anyway, so let's actually go ahead and talk about Disgaea in itself. Oh yeah, what are other PC features? There was one other thing I wanted to mention about the PC version of the game. Oh yeah, it has infinite resolution, and you can rescale it to whatever you want. So if I go ahead and make this into a window, which I'm not going to do because I'm capturing it, which would break everything, but you can actually scale this game up to any resolution you want just by clicking and dragging the window, which is actually pretty dang cool. So like, let's say you want to run it. Like, one thing that I've done is I've had it running while I'm rendering and like watching YouTube videos or something like that. And I'll just be like, I'm just going to make it this little tiny window, and it works perfectly fine and it scales quite well. It only displays in 16:9 when you're not in full screen, so the window is always going to try to keep that aspect ratio. However, when you full screen it, it seems to go in any resolution that you want. I was able to fit it into a 16:10. I had it at 4:3, and it seemed to work fine. There was some scaling issues with the new UI, so you can go into settings and they actually have the new user interface. You can actually switch it back to the original user interface if you don't like it, and that is actually quite nice as well. It's kind of blurry, especially when you start resolutioning it up. So I prefer the new user interface, and it also affects the like cutscenes and dialogues and the character portraits and things like that, which have been up-resed and very, very cleanly, like kind of cleaned up a lot, which is actually quite nice, and I enjoy that quite a bit because the characters that they show, I won't show any story stuff into this video because obviously that goes into spoilers and I'm quite far into the game. But the character portraits and stuff like that look fantastic in this version of the game in comparison to everything else because they're not restricted to a resolution, which is quite nice. And the game does scale quite well. The character sprites are a little bit kind of blurry, especially if you turn on their filtering setting. So they have a filter setting. Where is it? I think it's on this one. Nope, it's on the other one. I probably should have looked through this before then. Character filter, there we go. So if you turn this on, this is going to look good if you're on like a TV screen and really far away and you need something to just look like clean lines. So let's say you're up-resing to 1920 by 1080 and you're on a faraway screen, this sort of thing will look nice. But if you're on a monitor like I am really close to the screen, you're going to absolutely hate that. So I suggest kind of adjusting your visuals like kind of settings depending on what you want. So they have two different ones as well. So they have the bilinear, the kind of deposterized, and then they have off, which I prefer off because it keeps the original look of the game. And maybe that's just nostalgia. Maybe I think it looks better just because of nostalgia. But yeah, there's also some kind of issues with scaling that comes in if you go into non-19 by 9 or 16:9 resolutions as well. So you'll actually have some pixels that seem like they're moving all the time because they're trying to position themselves in between two pixels. So you might get some like aliasing sort of things like that on here as well. But most of the time it doesn't really affect anything because, you know, once again, it's an old game. I can't really bash it for that. Anyways, let's actually talk about the game. So as you see here, if you've never played Disgaea, this is essentially how it works. It's a tactical JRPG, and in the first game, you were actually playing as Laharl, which is the Prince Overlord, basically. And you find out his dad's dead, and you're trying to become Overlord, basically. And everyone's like, in the Underworld, they're not going to respect you because they're demons, and yada yada. And the story takes place around that. And I absolutely love the story, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, here's your main hub. This is the castle and stuff like that. Now, it's not a very big area, and you'll notice there was a lot of technical limitations back on the PS2 when they originally made this game. So it's got very kind of basic 3D shapes, and all the characters are sprites and stuff like that, which I feel like is an aesthetic that actually holds up over time quite well. The character sprites are kind of lower like quality, like they're not as high res as I would have liked to see them. I think that a lot of their like future titles, like even the second game had higher res sprites than this one does, and just more pixel information would have been nice to kind of define the characters inside the world a little bit better. And especially with the new textures that they introduced in the PC version, you can definitely tell them apart from the scenery. Now, it's not so much if I end up turning off the new textures and stuff like that. It's a little bit better, but at the same time, the increased resolution really does kind of make them stand out, which is kind of a bummer. I wish that they would have done new artwork and everything like that, like a total remaster of everything. That would have been awesome. But at the same time, I can't really expect that too much. But here's your main hub, so you get all your shops and stuff like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about the progression and stuff like that. But you get your shops, you can get different weapons, you can get different sorts of accessories to go onto your characters as you level up. And you also have consumables and things like that as well. You also have a place to heal up your units because your units do not automatically heal after battle and everything, which is something that's not seen a lot in these tactical JRPGs. It seems like a lot of tactical JRPGs like to kind of make it so that you always heal between battles, but this one definitely does not do that, which is kind of nice, actually. I kind of like it because when you go into this place called the Item World, I'll talk about later, that becomes a huge mechanic. And you can also talk to people and be like, yeah, what will happen at the end? Yeah, I'm at the end of the game on the save, I'm sorry. So that's why I'm not going into any of the story stuff. Anyways, here's your portal person. This is where you're able to go to all the places. Now, the Item World is actually kind of an infinite zone. So here's the main story stuff. And inside each item is actually a randomized dungeon. So each item comes with like a randomized seed. And then you go into that dungeon and it's basically infinite. It goes down to a certain floor levels, but you can always get another item and go through another dungeon, and it seems like no matter how many you go through, it's always completely randomized. You'll never see the same dungeon twice. There's a few set pieces that you'll see the same time twice, like there's one to where it'll have like a special thing on top of a pillar, and that's just kind of like one thing that's put into the randomization kind of engine. But for the most part, you will not be seeing the same thing twice, which is quite nice. And they actually have a bunch of secrets and stuff like that I won't talk about in this video. But anyways, let's go ahead and go into a level. Let's go to Lunar Snowfields. And we'll go into like Freezing Souls. I don't remember any of these levels particularly well, so we're just going to go in here. This one doesn't have any geo panels, so... Oh, it does. Okay, sweet. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about the basic mechanics. So here we are on the stage. You can see it's a big setup level and everything. When you go into a level, you're going to see where all the enemies are and stuff like that. It doesn't do any fog of war or anything like that, which I personally think is kind of nice. I know that a lot of people like more depth. I will say that Disgaea is probably one of the ones that goes into a little bit less depth than a lot of people are going to be looking for. But at the same time, I think that's part of its charm, because a lot of its kind of tactics is in your positioning of your characters and leveling up your characters to be more powerful. And also the music for this game is fantastic. Once again, I'll talk about that later. Sorry, I just don't even know what to talk about this game because I love it so much. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about gameplay. So you have your main characters, and you can see I can move around and stuff like that. So you can go through your list, and you can select whatever character that you have available. And you can always make new characters as well. I'll talk about that after this battle. So I'm going to go ahead and grab Flan to show off the magic abilities as well. So you have basic attacks. So you have your movement, where you can move within a certain range, and that's determined by your character's move stat. And then you have your attack, which can be based on your weapon. So Flan has a staff, and Laharl has a sword right now. And you can put them with any weapon that you want as well. Like I could have Flan with a sword if I wanted to and stuff like that, and there's a whole different progression path and stuff like that as well. But then there's also other characters like Planier who can use guns, and so if I go down here and use attack, you can actually see that I have a ranged where I can actually use it in a distance. So I can go up here, I can hit attack, and you can see that I can attack in that sort of blue kind of range area that you see on the map. How do I zoom upwards? I don't remember. Whatever, we'll ignore it for now. There's also the camera controls are a little bit strange. I do want to mention right off the bat is that the controls are a little bit strange to get ahead of because they are based on the PSP version of the game, which means in order to access alternate actions, so the left and right bumper right now on default rotates the camera, but if I hold down X and hit the left bumper, it'll actually zoom in, and I believe the right one just cycles through the characters available for your moves and stuff like that, and there's a bunch of different things. Like when you're on a character, you hold down X and you're able to move them and stuff like that. The game doesn't tell you this, and so you actually have to either look at the manual that comes with the game, or you have to just have played the PSP version of the game to understand that, or just play around with the controls. I completely forgot when I first started playing, so I didn't know how to change the way your characters are facing, but they actually take more damage from the side and behind, and they can't dodge attacks from behind themselves. And so it's actually very important to know that you can move them in different directions. And if you're using the mouse and keyboard, you can actually just take the mouse and move it like I mentioned earlier. So yeah, anyways, go ahead and move the mouse off screen. Now, one thing that is annoying is the mouse takes forever to disappear on the screen if you're not using it. It does disappear eventually, but it takes 20 minutes, which is kind of annoying. So I always just put it into the bottom right of my screen. So it's just basically out of the way, and sooner or later it'll disappear. Anyway, let's go ahead and grab another character. So we'll grab Etna and place her over here. So you have different attack ranges depending on the weapon you use. Like a spear has a 2-hit range, so I can go behind Laharl and make a movement, and I could actually attack him if I want to. Now, obviously, I don't want to attack my own teammates, so let's go ahead and look at Flan. Now, there is also Special, which is going to be all your magic abilities and such. So you have different supportive abilities, such as Heal, and you have Espor, which is going to remove status effects, and there are a bunch of status effects in this game, like Poison and Paralyze. I won't go over all of them. And then you also have different abilities. Now, there's three different types of abilities. There's magic, which can be used no matter what weapon you're using, depending on if the character has it learned or not. And we're going to use magic over here to use it on here. And then you also have different abilities such as weapon abilities. Now, the staff doesn't have any weapon abilities, but Laharl, well, I actually used his ability already. Etna actually already has a bunch of abilities for her weapon specifically. So like Impaler, which is going to be a specific ability towards that weapon. And then you also have character specific ones, such as Etna has Sexy Beam because she's sexy apparently. Not really, that's going to be subjective. But anyways, and then she also has Chaos Impact and Pretty Raid, which are specific to her character, and only her, only she can learn that ability. Except for some alterations. So Planier was an added character, and they have a Sugi drop I think that's how you say it, Asugi drop. I don't know. Anyways, they have abilities that are kind of similar, and that's one of the problems with the abilities is a lot of abilities end up being kind of samey in a lot of their hit ranges because there's not a big variety, but at the same time, they don't do that thing to where there's 20 abilities that do the same thing. If it's an ability that does the same thing, then it just has the same character. Now, one thing that is actually quite unique about this game specifically is you can actually kind of combo characters together. And so I set up Flan to use a wind ability up here in these 3 slots here. Now it doesn't display that. I kind of wish that they did what they did with newer games and they end up making an icon and stuff like that. But now I can take another character and be like, oh, I want to use Giga Star, and let's go ahead and set this up so that it's going to attack another character. Now if I say execute, it'll actually run through all the abilities that I have set up in a line, and that actually builds up a combo meter, and you can use that to deal extra damage and build up a combo count, or your bonus gauge. And now your bonus gauge will actually give you bonus rewards and extra damage depending on how many you combo together. You can also get things called team attacks, which I'm going to show in a little bit, to where when characters are next to each other, it will actually be able to attack the same character. And you can actually use this to kind of exploit a lot of the kind of weird design decisions that at first seem unintentional. They seem like, oh, that's an exploit or something like that. But the game actually takes it to heart, and you're able to use those abilities and that kind of classic style organization of the way abilities are used to kind of advance the way that you go through a level in very interesting ways. And it's kind of a weird thing to see because a lot of modern games, they'd be kind of like, oh, we need to work out this ability so that this isn't happening and stuff like that. But realistically, they ended up doing a lot of interesting things with that. And one of them is that I can move a character and then move another character next to them. One thing that's kind of interesting about this game, let's use an example. So another thing that this game has, I'm going to talk about 2 other features right now, is you actually have the lift feature where you can pick up a character and you can actually throw them. So if I move Etna over here, I can be like, lift up Laharl and throw Laharl. Now you can only throw humanoid characters, I believe, only humanoid characters can pick up other characters, so monsters and stuff like that can't actually use that, but you can use that to get extra distance, and they actually use it in some maps, and especially randomized maps, to where you can get situations to where you can only do different effects based on, you know, where you're positioned and stuff like that, so you'll actually have to use the throw mechanic to do other things, and they actually have geo panels, which I'll talk about in another second. Now, another mechanic that they have is they call a team tack. So I can actually pick up this character and throw them over there so I can get the extra distance. And then if I move Flan over here, and I'm just going to end up sorting out a few other characters to try and get a team attack going. I don't know, it's a little bit difficult. It depends on who you have in your party and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and lift her up and throw her around here so I can get the extra distance to get her in position. Oops, I think I need to use somebody else to move her. I'm not going to be doing this too often here. Move her here and lift. Oops, I lifted the wrong person. One thing that's good is you can actually undo all your moves. I'm sorry, I'm kind of taking a while to do this. There we go. It is a game that does take a lot of bit of time. So if you're somebody who, you know, doesn't want to take a lot of time playing the game, that is one thing that this game unfortunately does not try to fix. So that is a thing. But there's also a thing called the team attack. So if I use attack here, you can actually see up in the top left, chance of team attack, which means that Fallen has a 40% attack or 40% chance to actually execute with that attack. Now, it didn't actually trigger at that moment, but basically what they'll do is they'll actually combo together with their attack, and you can actually use multiple people's attacks. So let's say I have Etna, which has a spear, next to Laharl. I could have them both attack the same target and get 2 team attacks off at the same time, which actually adds a lot of tactical kind of advantage to positioning your characters, and that's where most of the tactical advantages come in to this game. Now, on the story levels, it's not like most of the beginner stuff isn't going to be too difficult. This is actually about halfway through the game, I think, for this level. And so they're starting to throw in things like geo panels and things like that to do special effects. And so you can see these characters are over here buffing constantly. And this is where I want to talk about the kind of geo panels. Actually, before I talk about geo panels, I should probably talk about the pupil system. I'll talk a little bit more about it. But for the team attacks and stuff like that, there's a feature called pupils, like mentor and pupils, to where you're able to create new characters using different characters' mana. And their mana actually makes a pupil who kind of goes under them. And you can, like, masters can learn, or mentors can learn abilities from their pupils. So let's say Flan, for example, I have a bunch of characters. Now, one flaw with this is you can't actually see what like character is kind of in there unless you actually click on a character and go to status. And so if I click on here and go through, it'll actually say mentors and pupils. So my mentor for this character is Flan. Now, Flan herself cannot learn all of the ice spells. So what I do instead is I have a pupil that can learn the ice spells. So it'll be this character, which is an ice mage, or a blue mage as they call it. And I'll have all of the ice spells that I can learn, and I'm still leveling her up, so she doesn't know all of them yet. But you get spells as you level up. And different classes and characters have different kind of stats depending on that, which means that certain characters you're going to want to put as pupils under different characters so that you can get different abilities. So now Flan, since I have a bunch of pupils, I actually have all of those kind of elemental abilities, even though she's not able to learn them by default. Now, there is a problem with this, as I was showing with the status thing. You can't actually see it unless you're in this menu here. So one thing that I kind of did with the names is this kind of a workaround. They fix this in later games. You can actually see that I have an L or an F or an E behind it, which means that basically that's the main character I have it behind. So Flan has an F, Laharl has an L, so I have, a fire mage, so I can have fire on him and stuff like that. So, that's kind of a workaround that I've done, but that is kind of annoying. There's a lot of UI issues in this game that don't exactly kind of explain things properly, and one of those things is the Geopano system. So you'll see these little tiny cone things. Now these are called geos. And so basically what a geo symbol is it gives abilities to different sort of sections. And so you can see here, this one gives an enemy boost ×3, and this one gives an attack +1. Now it's going to be dependent on the color that's underneath it. Now, so you'll see that's kind of like the yellow. So all the yellow platforms on the map will end up having that effect. And this is toggleable as well if you want to toggle on the colors and whatnot. So if you don't want to see them, you can just turn them off, which I normally play with them off because I don't need to see them. I turn them on when I start the map and they just kind of memorize where they're at. And then over here, you can see the map kind of set up this section to where there's a bunch of enemies with extra attacks. So these archers will attack twice when they use their attacks. And then they also have 3 times stats, which is kind of ridiculous when you get to this area. So one thing that you can do is you can destroy these geopanels. One thing about destroying the geopanels is they'll actually explode and cause a bunch of different map effects. And you can use that to kind of alter the map. So when you destroy a geopanel or a geo symbol on top of a geopanel, it's going to change all the geopanels of that color into the color of the geo symbol, which means that basically you can use that to kind of make the map all one color and add different effects, or you can make it so that you can get rid of certain ones. Like let's say this enemy attack ×3, could take Flan over here. Let's say enemy boost ×3. Let's go ahead and attack it. That's probably not going to destroy it. Oh, no, it destroyed it. And now these panels, as you can see up in the top left, no longer have that effect. And then I could also, let's say I wanted to decrease their attack over there before I get over to that area, I can end up moving this geo panel or geo symbol on top of this geo panel and actually kind of alter the entire kind of point of that area. And so that's kind of an interesting thing, and that really gets into the item world and stuff like that, where it's all randomized and you can actually use a character to change how the effects play out and everything like that, which is actually quite interesting. I think it's one of the things that a lot of these games don't do. There's a lot of games in tactical kind of JRPGs that do kind of elemental effects and stuff like that, but I have never seen another game series actually do something like geopanels, which is actually quite nice. Aside from the other games that are made by the same developers, that's something that they do. So yeah, I think, what is it called? I can't remember what it's called, but there's another game that I played from them that I hopefully can get a review done eventually of, that they also have a similar system, but it's slightly different and maybe not as interesting and as in-depth, but it is still a thing regardless. Anyways, that's the basics of the gameplay. Now, there's obviously a bunch of different kind of in-depth stuff about it. Like, I guess I can talk about character progression, because character progression is one of the things that really drives a lot of people towards this game, because this game is one that kind of, I don't know, like kind of advertises on the fact that it's near infinite. So you can level all the way up to level 999 or 9,999, I think. I can't remember how many 9s it is. It's a lot of 9s. And basically, it's a game where you can keep leveling. Now, on each character, if I go to the status, you can actually see that there's a bunch of different stats here as well. So you can see the level, you can get different amount of counters. So each different character will have different like times that they can counter an attack. So when they get attacked, they have a counter chance. So like Laharl has 2 counter attacks where you can just counter somebody twice. But then Etna only has 1. Now you can increase that through another feature I'll talk about after this mission. But for the most part, yeah, that's kind of it. But there's a bunch of different stats, and you can actually level multiple things. So each ability actually has a level that you do. You can actually reset your levels and increase your base power level. And so, like, let's say Laharl. One thing that I've done is I accidentally over-leveled him, which is one problem with this game. You can actually very easily over-level a character, and I'll talk about that a little bit later because it can be fixed. But I got him all the way up to like level 300 because I was doing this one thing to try and unlock one of the extra characters that were from the DS version just so I could show it off. But then I I wasn't like powerful enough to get there. So I'm like, you know what? I want to get this done. So I'm just going to reset his level. So I reset his level. And what that does is it gives you points. Like it kind of removes some of your stats and it removes like a certain percentage of your abilities level. And then you're able to reset your level. But it also gives you points that you can put into your character that allow you to set what you want as your extra stats. So I put a little bit of extra speed into Laharl, and I also upped his attack damage, which meant that when he leveled again, his scaling would be completely different. And so this allows you to actually customize your characters quite a lot, as well, as long as you're able to like give in the time for it. You know, if you want to put in the time to make it so that like Etna is a magic user, you can completely do that, even though her stats are, for the most part, completely, you know, physical based. Now you could also see that my character attacked twice. Now these geo panels that actually affect both sides of them, like battle. So it'll affect your team, enemy team, whatever. It'll affect anyone who's on the panel, including things like they also have boosting maps, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to where it'll have like bonus XP, and everyone who's on that tile that gets killed ends up giving bonus XP. Or here's a team attack. So 3 characters right next to each other, and they actually teamed up together and they were able to kind of do bonus damage. And that doesn't affect the turn counter of Rinna or Laharl here. It actually just ends up affecting that one character. So you can actually use that to kind of increase damage without actually using up turns, which is actually kind of cool. Another thing is if I moved Laharl here and I actually had his ability here, so I can actually move him back after that team attack. So let's say I didn't want to move him there anymore, I could actually move him over here, which is actually, a lot of people saw that as an exploit, but there's actually kind of a lot of designed elements around that where you can actually move out a low-level character like a pupil to give, like, let's say I had Flan over here and I had her next to the portal, I could actually move a pupil out, let Flan use the ability, because the way the pupils work is when they're next to him, you're able to use that ability and learn it. And so I would be able to use that ability, but then able to send the pupil back into the base or back to where they were safe. That way they don't die. So it's an interesting mechanic that's one of the more advanced things in this game that you can do. Like most games wouldn't allow you to do it, or you wouldn't think that you could, but it actually kind of plays into the design quite well. Whether that was intentional or not is kind of up in the air, but quite frankly, I think it was intentional because they saw it and they're like, you know what, we don't have to change it. Anyway, there is the level. It builds up all your bonus stuff and it gives you your rewards. Now let's talk about a little bit more progression and a little bit more of the advanced stuff. Now, obviously you're able to get different equipment and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and go into the equip screen so you can equip different characters with different stats. Now you get 4 different slots. You have a weapon slot and then 3 free slots where you can kind of equip any accessory that you want. And so for my characters, I have mostly just general stat stuff. I'm not trying to optimize any character at the moment, so it's mostly just kind of like a bundled mess, but you have a lot of different accessories that do a different thing. So you have your general kind of master accessories that give like all different stats. And so you can see like this testament thing is actually a very high level item that gives a bunch of stats. It's not a very rare item. They actually have an interesting thing with the rarity in this game to where the rarity is displayed by a number. And so if I go into my items list, I can actually go over to my storage and you can see like there's 150, 110 over on the rarity on the top right. But when I go down to like this dream hand, it has 2 rarity or a 0 rarity, which is super rare. They'll have more population stat and they'll have higher stats, like higher increases of stats. Now this bonus stats is actually what ties into the kind of item world, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit in a second. I'm going to go ahead and ignore that for now, but the rarity ends up affecting a lot of that, and it also works into bribing and stuff like that. Now, there's a lot of mechanics that I'm going to end up skipping over, but I'm just going to go over this real quick. So I talked about how you can reset your characters and everything like that. That goes through this receptionist over here, which is through the Dark Assembly. So if I click on here, you can see Dark Assembly and tutorial stuff, so you can end up doing the tutorial anytime you want. Also, I want to point out that the artwork is awesome in this game, by the way. Anyway, so I'll go ahead and go to Laharl, and you can go through and you can actually like see, let's see all the senators and stuff like that. And what this does is basically, if I want to go through and do an exam and stuff like that, I can promote my character to being better in this rank. Now, Laharl's a bad example because I haven't gotten very far with him on his rebirth. When you re-level a character, like when you reset a character's level, it also resets all this stuff. But we can go through a thing and be like, I want to raise military stats, or military funds, sorry. And so they'll be like, you know what? I'm either for this or against it. You can begin vote, but you can also like bribe them. You can just end up like, let's say this is going to fail because it always does. You'll be like, let's persuade by force. And you can just end up killing all of them if you want to, if you think you're strong enough, which you can actually get strong enough, which is one thing about the scaling in this game that's actually quite interesting, is that, you know, these guys from the Dark Assembly start off really, really powerful, and you can get different things, like different worlds and things like that. Like, you can unlock a lot of game content through that, and it's an interesting mechanic because it doesn't only promote you to kind of go by random chance, but it also promotes you to level up farther so that you can get to that new level content, which is one thing that is actually really, really good about this game, is that the game has near infinite scaling. Like, there's people who have ended up capping out in this game, and quite frankly, I think that was all just kind of like, just because of the way that, you know, the fact of how games are made, they have to have a limit because variables and stuff like that don't go forever. But the problem is, like, you know, you run into a situation to where, you know, in most games, they'll have it so you can get up to level 999, but like, what's the point? In this one, you can get to level 9,999, and there's still stuff for you to see and to fight and to get through, and level 9,999 may not actually be strong enough to do what you want to do at the highest ranking of the game. You have to end up rebirthing, you have to maximize your equipment, you have to maximize your strategy, and you have to actually figure out how to get your character strong enough to complete the later stages of the game, which is one thing that has actually made this game extremely interesting for a long period of time, and I feel like that's a lot of its staying power. Now, obviously, they improved this in later editions of the game. I mean, they're on, like, I think they're on Disgaea 7 or 8 now. Like, it's got a lot of games in them. I haven't played all of them, so I can't speak to all of them, but they do end up improving over time. But the first game has a lot of things that, like ridiculous effects and stuff like that, kind of go off the wall in the later ones as well and stuff like that. But the first one has a lot of aspects in the kind of art and story aspect, which I think is what I'm going to go into now. I'm just going to continue playing. I'm going to play through the item world a little bit, which you can see all the geo panels and stuff. Oh, I forgot to talk about one thing, though. Let's go ahead and quit and go into the create a character thing real quick. So one thing that I also almost just forgot to mention is you can actually make new characters. I keep pushing B because I've been playing another game that uses that as a confirm button. I'm sorry. Anyways, go into the hall, create a new character. They can also make different characters. Now, one thing about this character creation thing is actually kind of interesting is that each character, when you unlock one, you unlock them by either fighting or leveling up a class. So monsters, the more monsters you kill, the more versions you unlock, and the stronger they get, and the easier well, not really the stronger they get, the easier they get to unlock. And so, like, let's say this Cyclops here, you know, I can get him, but it costs a lot of mana to unlock him. But if I kill more of him, it gets easier and easier to unlock. So let's go to, like, a zombie. I've killed tons of zombies. So I can see at the bottom left, I've killed 839 or 37 zombies. That's quite a few of them, which means that they're actually fairly cheap to kind of unlock. So that means that, you know, I don't need as much mana to unlock the better variants and stuff like that. And you also get these different sort of styles, I guess. You get the good for nothing, which actually makes you, like, have to put down abilities. Or you also have your average, and you can go up all the way to genius, which when you do this, and name him, we'll call him Quir or Q. Yeah, we'll just do Q. That works. Done. All right, and then what you're able to do is you're able to kind of adjust their stats and stuff like that. And depending on what level you actually put them at, you can go into increasing. And this is what the rebirth does as well, where you're able to kind of adjust their stats. So it'll be like, I want this zombie to be, you know, have some defense, and I want him to be, you know, more healthy. And I can be like, all right, there we go. There's the stats. And then you can confirm it and create them and everything like that, which is kind of cool. And then for the classes, which is the humanoid races, which are actually demons, because everything's a demon in this game, you actually unlock the later additions by leveling up any of these levels. So right now, I have cleric and I have a priest. And since they're actually, no, I think I have a priest and a bishop. And since I'm leveling them up, I get these later additions. For like the mages, since I leveled up these 3 versions of the mages, I actually unlocked a prism mage, which has all the elements. And you unlock another version of the mage, which has all the different, like, has like all the star powers and things like that. It's kind of an interesting system to where it promotes you to use different characters. Now, this isn't something we haven't seen before in tactical RPGs, but it is something that I find enjoyable. And the fact that, you know, you end up summoning monsters easier by killing more of them is kind of an interesting mechanic, in my opinion. Instead of it just being you know, you just hire them or find them or summon them or tame them, it's more of a situation where you just want to go and murder a bunch of them. And so you murder a bunch of them and then you get more. And I haven't actually unlocked all the characters, I don't think. I think I'm missing like 3 or 4. But yeah, and then I haven't leveled up certain classes in this save file. Like, I haven't bothered with the scout yet, and I haven't bothered with the rogue yet, and some of the variants and stuff like that, because this game can take a long time to level them up. But that's also another thing that can be done, and I haven't unlocked all the classes either. All right, anyways, I'm going to go through the item world, and let's go ahead and talk about the story and stuff like that. Now, I'm not showing any story content because quite frankly, I don't want to because I don't want to spoil it. I talked about the beginning of the kind of game. So at the beginning of the story, you are playing as Prince Laharo, and there's a bunch of different kind of wacky things. The story is very kind of lighthearted, but at the same time, it's got a very powerful message behind it, and it is kind of serious in an interesting way to where it kind of, I don't really know. It's a very unique feeling that a lot of games kind of fail these days. It's very comical and very uplifting, and it really plays heart to the way it kind of just looks, and the way the game is very ridiculous, but at the same time, it's kind of grounded in its storytelling. And the characters are very characterized, and each character has a very specific personality. Each character has their own kind of progression, in a sense, to where, like, you know, there's real, I don't know, you like see characters change throughout the game, which is so, it feels so rare in games these days. Well, I know JRPGs in general are very good at this in a lot of times, but at the same time, this game does it in such a weird and subtle way to where it's not like, oh, this person's this way now. It's more like, this character did something slightly strange and it seems normal throughout the entire story, but then you go back to the beginning of the game and you're like, oh, whoa, he's a completely different character at this stage of the game, or she would never say that. And then, like, you know, later on in the game, you realize, like, oh, wow, like, they actually changed. And the progression within the story is so subtle and just so granular that it's just absolutely fantastic storytelling. And I absolutely love it. Now, that's not to say it's perfect. The voice acting has a few hiccups here and there. It's mostly amazing. The voice quality is actually quite fantastic. I think it's better than the DS version, considering the DS version had no voices whatsoever, so obviously it's better than none. And I think the voice quality is better than the PSP version, but I can't say if it's higher than the PS2 version. I don't know. I would like to say it's resampled or something like that because it sounds fantastic, but that might just be from the fact that it's on a PC, which means it uses PC drivers and it has the PC kind of, you know, pixel depth and everything like that, or not pixel depth, but sound depth, which means that it's going to sound better no matter what. But regardless, you know, it actually, the voice quality of it, for especially when it came out, was absolutely spectacular voice acting in comparison to when it came out. Now, obviously, there's a few times to where you're like, yeah, this sounds dated, which is fine. You know, obviously, it's a really old game, which means that some of the writing and some of the delivery is going to be a little bit off compared to what we're used to in modern games. But at the same time, it just blows me away about how well the voice acting in this game is actually held up. And it very much kind of characterizes the characters. Now, there's been some debate about the character Etna's voice actor because it changed from the original PS2 version, which means if you played the PS2 version a lot, like I did, then you'll probably know that there's kind of a different feel to her character at first. And because of that, some players just don't like the kind of newer versions of the game because of that. They're like, oh, well, they ruined Etna's character and yada yada. But after playing through it and playing through the original again as well, I feel like it was better presented and it's much higher quality. Now, that does come into effect when you actually compare it to the other voices. If you get really analytical about it and really kind of listen for it, you can kind of hear some differences. Like, even if it's a different voice quality, it sounds like it was recorded at a different, like, studio and everything. Like, it does sound like it's a little bit out of place, which is, it's fine. It's just a little bit of lack of polish thing. Or actually, it's a more polished voice acting kind of session than the rest of it because it was recorded afterwards, like, by several years. So that's just kind of that's just a thing that happened, I guess, and it's not really that big of a deal. However, now let's go ahead and talk about the kind of other aspects of the story that I actually love, because it actually has, not only does it have kind of like one main story that actually has a really powerful message that I really, really like, and it is a story that is kind of, I'd like to say it stuck with me for all these years. Like, every time I think about that sort of story and everything like that, I think of Disgaea right off the bat, and it's one of the first games that I played that actually had that effect on me, I would say, which makes it really, really powerful. Now, its delivery isn't perfect because the game isn't exactly cinematic, so you're not going to get your movie experience, but it is still a game that I would say play through it just for the story, because it is actually quite a good story, and the main story doesn't actually require very much grinding, which is, once again, one of the things I really, really like. Now, I talked about Laharo over-leveling. One of the problems with that is the fact that, you know, I just kind of used him for the most part to just get through the story because it's fairly easy to do so. You can go through with the main story with like 2 to 3 characters until you get to like the last 3 levels, which really ramp up in difficulty, which is kind of just classic game design. They're always like, oh, we need to make the last levels really difficult because that's just how it worked. And so that's kind of a problem that this game has. But at the same time, It's kind of understandable. I kind of like it because it's classic, but at the same time, some people might not. I don't know. That's up to you. And the story is just fantastic in every way, so I like it a lot. Now, the art style is going to be very subjective to a lot of people. Now, obviously, the character portraits and stuff like that, which I wish I could show, but I don't think there's a lot of story bits that I can show. Maybe I'll show up a clip. Like, I'll start a new game, and I'll show up a clip of the very first intro stuff right here. And so you can kind of see what the character portraits and the dialogue looks like. Like, it's presented kind of like a visual novel and everything like that, but the voice acting and the kind of way the character portraits look just makes it so much more, and it just looks fantastic. Like, it's one of the better examples of it, and like even visual novels that rely their entire kind of business model on that presentation kind of fail at that, and I think that this game actually did a really good job with it, because the kind of art style that they have has a very distinct feel to it, and the character kind of expressions are very characteristic. You can really kind of feel how those characters were feeling, which is actually something that I would say that the art style does really, really well. The art is very, very interesting. Now, it does have some inconsistencies, such as the pixel graphics for the sprites and then the actual character drawing. So, like, let's switch back to my screen here. Hopefully I already have. You can see down the bottom left, you can see the Laharl image, which that art style looks completely different than what you see in the middle of the screen. Mostly because that's been up-res and everything like that. Those are higher definition than they were on the PS2. But regardless, you see those art style and then you look at the sprites and you're like, like it's the same character and the same kind of designs. Like, they don't have like big pronounced noses or anything like that. Like, there's no obvious kind of like mismatches, but at the same time, there is some kind of artistic mismatch in the way that it kind of looks, which is a little bit unfortunate. But once again, I think that came down to kind of the, I guess, technical limitations, because later games definitely get around this and it looks fantastic, especially when, like, their latest game, I was just like, oh god, this looks awesome. I wish I could play this back on the PS2 because it actually looks that good. But back onto the art style, you know, a lot of it looks fantastic and a lot of it is very characterized and very personalized to this game specifically, which is something, once again, that a lot of games don't have. It doesn't feel generic. It doesn't feel kind of like everything else that we've seen. Maybe this map and stuff like that, like the maps designs and everything like that, can get a little bit samey, but it does go across a big variety of different areas. So you'll go to, like, let's say you start off and you're in a forest, and then you go to like some ruins, and then you go to an icy place, you go to the volcano, you go to space. And so, like, you know, there's a bunch of different ridiculous stuff. And once again, with that like level scaling, like, you can level up infinitely and there's still content to go to, and so you're still kind of seeing some new areas and stuff like that. Like, it's not completely infinite. You'll be seeing a few areas to where you're like, yeah, I've seen this before, whatever, I don't care. But at the same time, like, it's going to be a different layout. You can go to different areas. Like, I know that the alternate Netherworld looks different than the rest of the game, and it's like, yeah, that type of stuff is kind of interesting. So there's a lot of like kind of different areas that you can see, which is kind of cool as well with the art style, which is one thing that I particularly like about this game specifically, because a lot of tactical JRPGs end up having the situation to where a lot of the areas kind of feel samey because they kind of limit themselves, and this game does to a certain extent. But at the same time, I feel like it has enough variety to keep me interested. Like, this randomized stuff, you'll go from areas that are kind of like this weird down kind of underground look that's kind of all dirty and stuff like that, to like demonic ruins, or you'll go to like one that's on a spaceship, or not a spaceship, but like a land ship thing, which is actually a rare event that can happen, and yada yada yada. And I will say, like, the characters and stuff like that are very personalized. So like when I'm using different abilities, they have those little different animations and stuff like that. Once again, those like kind of very characterized and stuff like that. There are, like, when they're not using main characters, like let's say Emmy here isn't actually a main character, or Rachel here isn't actually a main character, they have generic sprites. But at the same time, they still kind of have a personality to them, which is kind of nice. So like the rogue is very, like, it always looks serious in its animations, but then like the mages and stuff like that, they're always smiling and they're so happy all the time when they're using their abilities and stuff like that. It's just, it adds a little bit of fun to the game. So yeah, I like the art style, and also the music is fantastic. I will say that the music kind of repeats itself too often, so you end up hearing the same soundtrack too many times quite often. And so like this soundtrack that's in the background of this level, I've heard this 1,100,000 times. Like, it's quite annoying after a while. Like, even though the music is fantastic, the best music in the game is only used a few times, which is unfortunate. So stuff like the music that's on like the last battles and stuff like that, fantastic soundtracks, but you know, this generic combat stuff, meh, take it or leave it. I'm not really, like, it has a personality to it, once again, that fits the game, and I think that's cool. but at the same time, it gets very, very annoying, and it doesn't have a very repeatable sort of pattern to it. You do get tired of it, which is unfortunate. So yeah, just to kind of wrap this up as well, like, I think this is a fantastic game. Like, as a conclusion, it's a fantastic game. It is kind of classical, so if you don't like classic JRPGs or tactical JRPGs, you might not like this one, because it does, like, to get to that extra content, like, after you get through the main story doesn't require, like, pretty much any grinding, if at all, and they do have levels to where, like, there will be, like, 6 zombies on top of an XP booster thing, and then you can just, like, wipe them out with one attack, and then you get all that XP and boosting and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. So if you want to grind, you know, the game is very much about grinding intelligently rather than just grinding at all. And so, you know, if you want to get those extra stats to kind of progress farther, or you want to get into that deeper level stuff, you're going to grind more intelligently, which makes it kind of interesting. You're kind of strategizing how you want to level up characters and stuff like that. One major problem that the characters do have with leveling is you get XP by either getting the landing kill or participating in the landing kill, which means that you either have to use team attacks or you have to land the killing blow to actually get the experience, which means that certain characters will end up over leveling. So, like, let's say Laharo, which was the character I mostly used for the main story this time around, like, he ended up leveling way beyond everyone else because I just walk up to enemies, attack once, boom, and he gets all the XP and nobody else gets that XP. Now, there's a few ways to get around that through, like, smart boosting and stuff like that, which is actually, a lot of people use that as a complaint, and I would as well, but at the same time, it kind of adds a strategy to things. And that's one of the things that actually makes the grinding in this game more interesting, is you're trying to strategize how you can do it optimally and level up different characters, which is kind of nice. And, you know, the story, obviously the story is fantastic. You know, if you don't like kind of, I guess, darker, kind of comical sort of style stories, then maybe you won't find it interesting, but I feel like it's a surprising one, because it starts off very lighthearted and then gets very serious later on, and you're like, whoa, like, that was actually a lot more powerful than I expected from this game, which is something that I never expected when I first played it, and now it's a story that's stuck with me for ever now. Since I ever played that game, or played this game, I'm like, oh yeah, like, I remember it. And so, yeah, I feel like that had an effect on me as a person, because it was that powerful of a story, and I was like, oh yeah. Now, obviously, maybe that's the time of the life I was in and everything like that, so it might not be as powerful these days, and it obviously doesn't have the cinematic presentation that we're used to these days. But once again, you know, if you can stand more older games on that, then maybe you'll find it interesting as well. Like, it's actually a really, really good story, like, surprisingly so. Also, you know, the art style and stuff like that, I personally like it. Obviously, that's subjective. I think the music is fantastic, but once again, repetitive. You know, as a conclusion, I strongly recommend this game to people who like tactical JRPGs. I don't think I recommend it to everyone, though, because it is a game that has aged. I think it's aged fairly well. I think that they were very fortunate in picking an art style that actually holds up quite well. It has kind of a nostalgic feel to it. Some of the UI could obviously use some working arounds, like the UI is not particularly fantastic. They kind of fix it up with the new UI revision, which ends up kind of making things a lot clearer, and it is very much easier to navigate on the PC version than it is on other versions of the game, which is kind of nice, because you can use the mouse and keyboard and stuff like that, so even if you don't know how to use a controller, you can play it. But at the same time, you know, there's some kind of weird features that are just because it's an older game, and some people may not be able to overlook that. But if you've played Disgaea before, and you're looking at this as like, hey, maybe should I get this or not? Like, based on if I've played the game before, that is going to be 100% up to you. If you love the game as much as I do, then I would definitely recommend it. But honestly, they don't really add a lot to the game that would change it for you much. Like, the main story is the same. The characters are obviously the same, aside from the additional characters. Now, if you didn't play the PSP version of the game, it may be easier to, like, kind of justify the game, because if you didn't play the PSP or DS versions of the game, there's actually quite a lot of content that they added between those two versions from the PS2 version. However, if you just played if you did play the PSP version, not just the PS2 version, then really all you're getting is the DS characters, and if you played the DS version of the game, like, it's kind of hard to recommend, because if you play just the DS version of the game, then the voice acting, I feel like, adds a hell of a lot to the game. But at the same time, it's not going to add new content for you to play through. Like, maybe you can end up getting this version of the game to, like, grind through to the higher levels and get the new endings and things like that. Like, they have a bunch of different endings that you can get depending on what you do in the game. And so you can go through and get all those if you never got them and stuff like that. So if you love the game, it's definitely a recommendation. If you don't, though, like, you're really going to have to like tactical JRPGs to enjoy the game. So if you don't like what you're seeing here with the gameplay and stuff like that, and I know I've been a little bit slower and I'm not really playing tactically because I'm doing commentary and this video is dragging on, I'm trying to end it. It's, once again, it's got more tactical than I'm showing off. But at the same time, like, if you're not into the style of gameplay or the style of art style, then you might not find the game too interesting. But yeah, that's my conclusion. I absolutely love this game. I think it's fantastic. It's a flawed game, and the later games in the series definitely improve on that. But for what it is, especially with how old it is actually a fantastic title that has held up extremely well. Like, it has held up way better than I ever could have imagined it would. Like, I figured I'd play this again and be like, oh yeah, this is like hella old now. And like, yes, it feels old, but it feels old in the correct way. Oh well, yeah, also, one thing about the items and stuff like that, you could actually see if I go to character real quick and I gotta pull somebody out. 1 second. If I go to Laharl, go to status, or equipped actually, you can actually see on the right side of my weapon, you have these little notches. Now these are from the population. Now the rarer the item, the more population they can have. Now this population is actually in the item world. So I'm in an item world of an item, and I actually found one. And so here is what they call a specialist. If you kill him, you subdue him, and you get to move that node or upgrade it however you want. And so I could move it from the item that I'm in into another weapon and stuff like that. Once again, that gets into advanced stuff. I'm not even going to cover it. But anyways, once again, this is a fantastic game. I love it. I don't recommend it to everyone because, once again, it's a dated game. It's a tactical RPG. If you don't like tactical RPGs, you will not enjoy this one. But once again, like, if you do like tactical RPGs, or even just a little, I recommend it for the story and the characters. It's just very, very well done, and it holds up very, very well. Anyways, this has been Michael with a very long impressions review. This actually dragged on way longer than I thought it was going to. Once again, it's a tactical game, which means that there's a lot of mechanics I want to talk about. I try to cover everything that I possibly can in a game, and that's not always the easiest thing to do. But anyways, this has been Michael with Disgaea PC Edition. I'm a little bit late on this review, which I feel like is good because it had a lot of problems. I mean, I've noticed it's starting to stutter a little bit, which I don't know if that's because I'm recording, because that normally doesn't happen while I'm playing. So that's a little bit strange, but you might have seen a little bit of stutter in the video and stuff like that. I apologize for that. I don't know if that's a problem with the game or if that's just a problem with my recording software. I think it's recording software because I don't remember seeing that, but it doesn't seem like it's taking very long. And once again, this isn't a game that's going to be relying on your like frame rate or anything like that, so it's not that big of a deal. It does run at 60 FPS, by the way, so it is all 60 FPS, glorious PC Master Race stuff, but whatever. But yeah, fantastic game. I love this game. And like, this is probably one of those games I'm going to be playing for a long time. Like, it's one of those games to where I'll play it and I'll be like, yeah, this is fantastic. But then I'll kind of be like, you know what? I need to play something else because obviously there's a lot of games to play. But it's a game that I always come back to, which is very strange. There's not a lot of games that I do that with. There's quite a few that I've like considered going back to, and I go back to them. I'm like, maybe not. But like, this guy is consistently one of those ones that I will go back to and replay through it multiple times. And I still haven't gone through and gotten all the endings because I can't beat the freaking Netherworld, like the alternate Netherworld, which is annoying me. I'm going to do it on this version of the game. Now, the fortunate part of this version is it does have like Steam Cloud and stuff like that. And so when I lose a PS2 or a PSP, like my PSP broke. And so the kind of analog stick doesn't work anymore, which means that this game, like whenever I try to play it on there, it just constantly rotates, which is super annoying. Yeah. Oh, also, they removed the multiplayer content from this game, but they integrated all the items into the game itself. I forgot to mention that because I completely forgot because I never played the multiplayer on the PSP version either. So, I don't know. That's a thing. So if you're still watching this video, there you go. You got more information. But anyways, I'm going to end up closing out this video here. Like, fantastic game. Like, I just want to kind of go back to the main menu and listen to that intro song because this game, I don't know. It's just, there's something about it that just, it makes me feel amazing. I don't know. I like it a lot. There's not a lot of games that I will give that much praise to. It's just a fantastic title. And I understand that some of that may be nostalgia because I played this for so many years in my life and I love it and I always come back to it. But at the same time, like, I've played so many games and I played so many fantastic games. And the fact that I can come back to this one over and over again kind of says a lot about it. And I mean, the first one has a certain feel to it that's very unique even to the series, which is kind of interesting. So like, even if you play the later Disgaea games and you're interested in these ones, like, and you have never played the first one, like the first one even has a different feel to it, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, anyways, I'm gonna close out this video. I don't know why I'm rambling. I just want to keep playing this game, and after I'm done playing this game, I have another video to record, so I'm kind of just making excuses. Anyways, bye! Overlord's Wrath. We'll end it with this. Just pulling power out of the air and making people explode. There's another one called Meteor Impact. Do I have a Meteor Impact? That one's ridiculous too. I don't know. Anyways, bye.